Good afternoon, BookTube. I come to you yet again with another video about what I've been reading in the last few days. I've been continuing with this collection of the complete poems of Coleridge. I'm enjoying it a lot more than I was. I'm now on the poem Christabel, which I believe is one of his early major works. I'm feeling ambivalent about it so far. It's about this rather strange woman who is possessed by some sort of spirit and has spent the last several hours, a few hours of her life in this poem, roaming around the countryside and is discovered by this girl who decides to help her. And it all goes on from there. I don't really know where the story is going to take me, but we'll see how it evolves as time goes on. Now, I am still of the belief that Coleridge is an inferior poet to Wordsworth. My opinion may change as I read more of him. My feelings towards him may warm, but I still feel that I'm missing a lot of what I like about Wordsworth, although I'm finding that as I go on in this collection, I'm encountering more poetry that reminds me of the things that I like about Wordsworth. So I'm still feeling very ambivalent about Coleridge so far, but we'll see what the next couple of hundred pages bring in terms of the quality of the poems in this anthology. So that's Coleridge's complete poems. Don't have much to add on what I was saying in my last video. I've not made any notes or anything of import. I read the second version that he had published in 1834 of his Rime of the Ancient Mariners, a Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The changes that he makes didn't seem to me all that major. Maybe I should reread the original and see how they compare. But the changes that he made didn't strike me as fundamentally changing the nature of the poem. And maybe that's my own misunderstanding, my own failure to appreciate the genius of Coleridge. But again, we will see how my opinion of him evolves the more I read of him. So that's Coleridge's complete poems. The thing I've been really focusing on for the past week has been this absolutely sensational book by Diarmaid MacCulloch, the renowned British historian of Christianity, Diarmaid MacCulloch, and his fantastic book, which is A History of Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. I've had this book in my possession for the past couple of years now, and I have dipped in and out of it, and I have read I had read the first couple hundred pages or so of the book, but up until now, I've not been able to discipline myself to actually read the whole thing from cover to cover, because it's just such a toe-crusher of a book, this brick of a thing, that I was rather intimidated at the amount of time it would take me to trawl through it. But I've forced myself to actually dedicate to reading the whole thing. I'm now more than halfway through. It's a mammoth work of 1,000 pages. It's a 1,000-page romp through the history of Christianity as it developed from its earliest beginnings to the present day. And it is just the most marvelous adventure. It really brings home how man-made this whole religion is, but also how fascinating it is. MacCulloch himself is actually nominally a member of the Church of England, not a completely happy member of the Church of England. He is a gay man. He decided not to go through with being ordained as a priest in the church because he doesn't agree with its stance on gay marriage. And he has a very complex relationship with Christianity in his own right. But for all that, he manages to write what I think is a fairly sympathetic as well as detailed account of how this religion came into being. Now, it's called the first 3,000 years because the first 1,000 years is very much focused on the build up to Christianity. So it talks about the influence of the Greeks and the Romans and how their particular concatenation of myths and legends contributed and philosophical ideas contributed in its own way to the development of the Christian faith. And it goes on from there. And it's brilliantly written. MacCulloch is the most witty, most engaging tour guide through the history of Christianity. He always has a witty line or a brilliant turn of phrase to slot into his work when he is giving us this story about Christianity. It is the most sensational, most marvelously written piece of work. I'm really enjoying it. I am addicted to it at this point. Yesterday I spent hours on end in my room reading this magnificent book. It's a tour de force. It's magisterial. And I would like to read out some bits which appeal to me. I've made generous annotations. I've underlined large parts of it. It's just spellbinding what he is able to do, how he traces the evolution of the faith and the different varieties of Christianity that emerged over the course of its tumultuous history. And it just reminds you that there was no one form that Christianity had to take. There were so many different turning points in the history of this religion. There were so many routes it could have taken. The conflict between Augustine on the one hand and his idea of salvation by faith alone, which so profoundly influenced Martin Luther, and Pelagius's idea that actually we can work towards our own salvation, that we can work towards being more perfect and being worthy of God's grace. And the clash between these two ideas and how those went on to shape Christianity. The clash between Arianism, this idea that Jesus was just a human, and between the Trinitarians on the other hand, who believe very much in the idea of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, very much believe that Jesus was both human and divine. The conflict between the Miaphysites, who stress the one nature of Jesus, this idea that his humanity and his divinity were fused together, and on the other hand, on the other extreme, the Diophysites with their idea that the human part of Jesus and the divine part are completely separate. And of course, in the middle you have the Chalcedonians, who achieved a sort of compromise solution, which has been central to the way in which Christians see the Trinity and see Jesus as a being ever since. It's just really fascinating to get your head around. And for people who aren't Christian, such as myself, I'm not a Christian, although I was raised one, it really is eye-opening, because not only does it remind you that there was no monopoly, really, on what Christianity was going to end up as, but it does go to show just how passionately people at the time held these beliefs and how seriously they took them. To us, in our modern day, It seems as if this is nothing more than a dispute over how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. These differences seem, to us, so pedantic, and yet people at the time took these beliefs very seriously. They considered them to be a matter of life and death, uh, a matter of literally salvation or damnation, and it's just a reminder of how different our ancestors were in that regard, of the staggeringly different attitude that they had towards faith. Obviously now, Christians are much more tolerant of differences among their ranks. They are much more willing to engage with those who do not share their exact perspective on how best to interpret the Bible. And I think that is a good thing. I think it's good that we don't have people being burned at the stake anymore for their beliefs. I think it's a good thing that we have learned to temper our fanaticism with dialogue and with reasoned discussion. And this has been very much for the best, in my opinion. I still hold the belief, and in this I agree with Nietzsche, that Martin Luther did a lot of damage with his movement, because what he did is he sabotaged the progress that was being made by the humanists during the Renaissance. He cut across all of the patient work that was being put in place by moderates like Erasmus, and he destroyed all that with his doctrinaire reassertion of Augustine's idea of salvation by faith. And what that did is it prompted a polarization in which you had on both sides, the Catholic and the Protestant side, you had a return to a more doctrinaire, more intolerant version of the faith. And that led to religious wars, it led to civil strife, it led to the bloody disaster that was the Anabaptist uprising in Munster, which is a chilling prefiguring and foreshadowing of communism and of fascism as well, and of the totalitarian potential in any belief system, really. Any belief system that's believed in strongly enough can justify enormous bloodshed, enormous suffering, tyranny, mass murder, on an appalling scale. And we can't forget the fact that Christianity, in its heyday, was responsible for monstrous atrocities against Jewish people, against Muslims, and also against those Christians who were seen as the wrong kind of Christian. So I don't mourn for the loss of the church's monopoly on society at all. I think it's a very good thing, and I say that as someone who has little sympathy for Christianity as a religion. Like Nietzsche, I believe that Christianity is a form of slave morality, unfortunately. I do believe that it was ultimately a rebellion by those who were dispossessed, those who were unlucky and unhappy in society, and wanted to take revenge on their aristocratic masters. Now, speaking of Nietzsche, as I was reading this book, I couldn't help but take off my shelf my copy of a Nietzsche reader, which is this very slim, well, not that slim, it's about 250 pages, no, almost 300 pages. It's this relatively slim paperback, penguin paperback, edited by the great Nietzsche scholar, R.J. Hollingdale, whose name you can see there. He put together many years ago this wonderful edition of Nietzsche's writings, organized according to subject. So you have his views on morality, his views on art, his views on religion, and all of that's in there. taken from all of his works over the course of a lifetime, with the exception of The Will to Power, because Hollingdale didn't regard that as being a real part of Nietzsche's oeuvre. Um, Nietzsche scholars since then have come to the conclusion that actually The Will to Power is a legitimate part of Nietzsche's canon. There was all sorts of controversy over the role that his sister may have played in tampering with the manuscript. The new consensus is now that The Will to Power is a genuine work of Nietzsche's. So I don't think Hollingdale's exclusion of The Will to Power from this edition is in fact justified in hindsight. But I have been referring a lot to the stuff that Nietzsche says in here about Christianity. I've read almost all of Nietzsche's works, from cover to cover. The Will to Power is the only one I've not read in full, and even then I've read a good chunk of it. But I have been referring to this a lot because MacCulloch's book and the things he says about the Christian faith in that book have had me going back to Nietzsche and thinking about the things that he said about Christianity and its influence on human society. So I've been going to this alongside my romp through the Christian faith with MacCulloch, and I expect to be doing a lot more of that as time goes on. So those are the three books that I've been reading this week. I don't have much else to add. I'm quite keen to get back to reading MacCulloch and what he has to say about the evolution of Counter-Reformation Catholicism, which is where I'm up to now in the book. I can't recommend it strongly enough. It is a fabulously well-researched piece of work. You can tell that there is a personality behind the pen. This is no dry-dust academic work. This is something that he's poured his heart and soul into, and you can tell that he's someone who has real affection for the faith, and who has a deep and profound interest in what he's doing. This is not some perfunctory piece of academic writing. This brick of a book, this toe crusher, this doorstopper, is something that is a labour of love. And I can't recommend it strongly enough. MacCulloch is now one of my favourite historians. I should also mention that about a year or so ago, I was trying to read this, and I was reading this simultaneously with his excellent book on Protestantism, which is called Protestantism, Europe's House Divided. Very good book. I haven't finished that either. I'm probably going to go to it and read it and finish it once I'm done with this. So that's Diarmaid MacCulloch's A History of Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. A Nietzsche Reader by Friedrich Nietzsche, edited by R.J. Hollingdale, the great Nietzsche scholar. And then we have the complete poems of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So that's all I have to present to you this week. We will see what the week coming has for us in terms of reading. I will probably have finished the MacCulloch book by the end of the week. I can't say whether I would have finished the Coleridge book because I'm reading that at a much slower pace, but we'll see how I get on with that. So that's all I have to say for now. Signing off for now, BookTube.